Hi, my name's Indigo and I guess you could say I used to be the quiet one. The one who didn't make trouble, didn't talk back, didn't get believed. When I was 14, my cousin, the one who broke me, was forgiven before I even stopped shaking. My mother called it grace. I called it betrayal. Years later, she let him move back into the house I ran from, said, "He's changed. You should forgive, too." So I disappeared. I built a new name, a company, a life they can only read about now. But tell me, when the people who hurt you keep rewriting your story, how do you take it back without becoming the villain they always said you were? I still remember the smell first, the church basement reeking of fried chicken, lemon disinfectant, and too many bodies pressed into folding chairs. It was summer in Gresham, the kind that made everything feel sticky and loud. Kids ran in circles near the dessert table, their sneakers squeaking against the linoleum floor. My mother, Valora, moved through the crowd like a queen at a Sunday banquet, her smile plastered on for every handshake. "Smile for the pastor, honey," she whispered when she caught me slouching near the lemonade cooler. "He's been asking about you. You should thank him for the youth retreat." I nodded, keeping my mouth shut. That was the rule: don't stir the pot, don't question, don't speak when silence would do. I'd heard it all my life: quiet girls are strong girls. Across the room, my cousin Darian was laughing too loud. He was 17, tall and golden like every boy the church moms adored. He winked when he caught me looking, then turned back to the group of girls clinging to his every word. I turned away, picking at the edge of my paper plate, counting the seconds until we could go home. When the potluck finally ended, we carried leftovers out to the car, Valora balancing a tray of casseroles like communion bread. "Wasn't that nice?" she asked. "You should have talked to Darian more. He misses you." I didn't answer. The air smelled like exhaust and sugar, and I could already feel the headache building behind my eyes. A few days later, a thunderstorm rolled through. I was in the living room, flipping channels, when Darian came in soaked from the rain. He threw himself onto the couch next to me, smelling like wet grass and cologne. "Move over," he said, grinning, his voice just a little too loud for the small space. I laughed, nervous, and scooted toward the armrest. He teased me about the cartoon I was watching, reached over for the remote, and in one motion his hand brushed against me in a way that froze everything. My body stopped listening. I shoved the remote into his lap and ran upstairs. My throat burned, but no sound came out. When I finally found my mother in the kitchen, I was shaking so hard the words tangled together. "Mom, he touched me," I said. "He?" She didn't look up from the sink. "Honey," she sighed, "you know how he jokes. Don't blow things out of proportion. He loves you, okay?" Her tone was calm, patient, the same one she used when the cat knocked over her vase. I waited for her to look at me, to see that I wasn't joking, but she just kept rinsing the dishes, the water running loud enough to drown anything else. I didn't tell anyone again. Luther, my father, wouldn't have known what to do anyway. He barely spoke at home, just moved through the rooms with the smell of motor oil and silence. 2 weeks later, we were back at the church for a family luncheon. I was told to wear white, because it photographs better. Valora ironed my dress that morning, humming hymns while the news played. "You'll help serve the food, then we'll take a nice picture for the church bulletin," she said. When we arrived, I could feel the heat pressing through the stained glass windows. The tables were covered in plastic cloths printed with little crosses. I helped refill water pitchers, pretending not to notice Darian across the room. He smiled at me like nothing had happened, waving his fingers in that careless way of his. Halfway through dessert, Valora appeared at my side. "Come on, sweetheart. They're taking a family photo." "I don't want to," I whispered. She leaned in close enough that I felt her perfume in my lungs. "Don't embarrass me, Indigo. Just one picture." She tugged my hand, pulling me forward. Darian was already there, standing beside the pastor, his arm extended. Everyone watched as I stepped into the frame. The camera flash was blinding. He rested his hand on my shoulder. "Say cheese," someone called. I smiled because I had to. The crowd clapped politely. Valora whispered through her teeth, "See? That wasn't so hard. It's good for the family to show unity." My stomach twisted. My skin itched where his hand had been. Afterward, I slipped away to the restroom. The hum of the air conditioner was the only sound. I turned on the faucet and scrubbed my hands until the skin went pink, then red. The soap smelled like hospital disinfectant. When I looked in the mirror, I didn't recognize myself. My face looked blank, like someone had erased the lines where expression used to be. I stared until my eyes blurred and whispered to the girl staring back, "You're not allowed to be upset. You're not allowed to be real." Outside, I could hear laughter, the muffled clatter of dishes being stacked. Life went on, even when I couldn't move. That night, back home, Valora hung the framed photo on the hallway wall. "Doesn't it look lovely?" she asked. Darian's smile was wide, mine was thin and crooked. "Everyone looks happy," she said. I went to bed in that same white dress. The fabric smelled like starch and cheap perfume. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling fan, the sound of its blades cutting through the dark. I thought about how easy it was for them to forget, how quickly truth could vanish when someone said it was inconvenient. If silence was strength, I was the strongest girl in town. But as the night dragged on, something small and sharp pressed against that idea. If they wouldn't see it now, I'd make them remember one day. The sky was still dark when I arrived at the dorm. There were no birds yet, just that muted hum of a campus still asleep, like a town before the sirens, before the headlines. I stood there for a long time with my duffel slung over one shoulder and my sketchbook pressed to my chest like a shield. The gate in front of me wasn't locked, but it may as well have been made of stone. I had no plan. No friend waiting inside. No one to hand me keys or tell me it would be okay. Just a note in my pocket that said, "Room 213, orientation starts at 9, and a clock on my phone that read 6:02 a.m. But I wasn't scared. I wasn't hopeful either. I was hollow in a way that felt useful. That emptiness kept me moving. For the first few months, I didn't talk much. I answered when asked, nodded politely, but mostly kept to myself. There was always someone louder in the room. That worked in my favor. I became known as the quiet one, the responsible roommate, the girl who made good grades but never went to parties, never caused drama. That was fine. I didn't come here to make friends. I came here to disappear and rebuild from scratch. 2 years passed like fog rolling over a highway. I went from dorms to shared apartments, from instant noodles to budgeting for rice and beans. I worked night shifts at a print shop, took classes during the day, and freelanced on the weekends, designing wedding menus and logos for yoga instructors who promised exposure but paid in Starbucks gift cards. I didn't complain. Every project was a brick. I was building something, even if no one saw it yet. Back home, Darian came and went. Sometimes he stayed in Gresham. Sometimes he vanished for weeks, then reappeared like a bad TV rerun. My mother never stopped referring to him as going through something. "Boys just take longer to mature," she said once during a rare phone call. "But you, Indigo, you're the strong one. Always so dependable." That sentence stuck to my ribs like stale bread. I was dependable because no one else ever had to be. By the time I was 16, I'd stopped asking for fairness. I wasn't naive anymore. I understood the rules. Darian could break things, furniture, people, trust, and still be welcomed with a warm plate and an excuse. I, on the other hand, was only valuable if I didn't ask for anything at all. So I stayed quiet. I got good at it. Too good. If silence was peace, I wrote in my journal one night, I should have been the calmest girl on earth. But peace wasn't what I had. What I had was a lid on boiling water, and eventually, something had to give. It happened on a Thursday, over dinner, like most of our family disasters did. I was home for the weekend, not because I missed anyone, but because my part-time job closed for inventory and I couldn't afford groceries that week. Valora insisted I come back, said she had extra roast in the oven and it's been too long since we all sat at the same table. Against better judgment, I said yes. The table looked the same, mismatched chairs, chipped plates, my father chewing silently while Valora spoke enough for both of them. Then Darian walked in. No knock. No warning. "Hey, kid," he said, like nothing had ever happened. He dropped his backpack next to the coat rack and kissed my mother on the cheek. I stiffened. My hand tightened around my fork. He sat down like it was still his house, reaching across me to grab a biscuit. His arm brushed mine and I flinched. He noticed. "What, still mad about that sketchbook?" he asked, smirking. My stomach dropped. He pulled it from his bag, the one I'd lost 2 years ago, the one I thought I'd left on a bus. He opened it right there at the table and started reading. My sketches, my notes, things I'd written when I didn't think anyone would ever see. Sometimes I dream of disappearing and no one noticing, he read aloud, laughing. Damn, you are a real bundle of joy, huh? Valora chuckled. Don't tease her, Darian. She's sensitive. Sensitive. That word hit me like a slap. I stood up so fast my chair tipped over. My father kept chewing. Valora blinked, confused. I said nothing. Walked straight upstairs. She followed 5 minutes later, knocked once, then opened the door anyway. You can't keep making mountains out of molehills, she said, arms crossed. He was just being playful. I turned to face her. Come. I didn't cry. You'd let me burn to keep the curtains clean, I said quietly. She frowned. That's not fair. No, I agreed. It never has been. That night, I opened my closet and pulled out the duffel I had packed 3 months ago, just in case. I added the few clean clothes I had brought home, my broken phone, my repurchased sketchbook. I left the room half an inch open. It didn't deserve a full goodbye. At 2 a.m., I crept downstairs in socks, my sneakers tied together and slung over my shoulder. Luther was sitting at the kitchen table in the dark, nursing a mug of cold coffee. He didn't look surprised. You'll have to figure it out there, he said. It wasn't permission. It wasn't support. It was surrender, plain and empty. I nodded once. That was all we exchanged. Outside, the air had turned sharp. Fall had lost its golden tint, and the cold came straight through my thin coat. I walked to the edge of the neighborhood, then caught a cab to the Greyhound station. The driver didn't speak. I was grateful. The bus was half empty. I sat near the back, pressing my head against the cool glass. The road stretched out in front of us, dark and endless. I didn't cry. I didn't think. I just existed for a while, floating on exhaustion and the quiet that comes after you've already said goodbye to the idea of being heard. By the time we reached Portland, the sky had lightened. The college campus looked gray and unfamiliar. I stepped off the bus and adjusted the strap on my duffel. In the sketchbook, I wrote one line, I left so quietly, I forgot to scream. I didn't know who I would become, but I knew who I could never be again. Those words stayed in my mind the first night I fell asleep in my Portland apartment, surrounded by boxes that smelled like ink and cardboard. I had a borrowed desk, a folding chair from Goodwill, and a stubborn Wi-Fi signal that blinked out whenever it rained. But it was mine. Work kept me alive. At 3 a.m, the hum of my old laptop filled the room while the city slept. I drank cheap coffee until my hands shook, designing logos for restaurants that would close within 6 months, branding podcasts that never aired another episode. Still, each job meant another bill paid. Each small success was a promise to the girl who once ran away with nothing but a sketchbook. I went by my middle name, and I never gave clients my address. My company website had no personal photos, no family story, just the work. I'd learned that invisibility was protection. One afternoon, while waiting for a file to upload, I checked my notifications. A client had tagged me in an article from a local paper, From Trauma to Triumph, How One Family's Love Built a Leader. I clicked, half curious, half cautious. The first picture stopped my breath. It was me, an old yearbook photo cropped beside an image of my mother, smiling that familiar smile I used to see across church pews. The headline credited my success to faith and family support. I read the opening line twice before I could believe it. She always had a strong spirit, my mother said. I pushed her, yes, but it made her who she is. There it was. Twist S4. No mention of what happened. No mention of the nights I couldn't breathe in that house. No mention of Darian. Just Valora, perfectly framed, telling the world that her daughter's pain was proof of her parenting. I scrolled through the comments, hundreds of them. What a great mom. That kind of tough love builds character. God bless families who don't give up on each other. I felt my pulse in my ears. Not sadness, something sharper, colder. Rage without volume. I whispered, they erased the worst of it but kept my name. For hours, I couldn't move. I sat in that folding chair, the article glowing from my screen, my reflection caught faintly in the glass. Outside, a siren wailed, then faded into the distance. The city kept living, unaware that mine had just been rewritten by someone else. I opened my sketchbook. The pages were filled with client drafts, doodles, fragments of thought. I wrote one sentence across the margin, if they tell the story long enough, people start believing it. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The air smelled like burnt coffee and printer ink. I went through my inbox, forcing myself to answer clients, to act normal. My body obeyed even when my mind screamed. By noon, I found myself drafting a post, screenshots of the article, the lies, a caption that began, "This is not my story." My fingers hovered above the post button. I imagined the comments, the responses, "You're bitter, let it go, family is everything." They'd make me the villain in the story again, the ungrateful daughter who couldn't forgive. I deleted the post. Closed my laptop. But the silence didn't feel like defeat this time. It felt like strategy. I knew how their world worked. They needed my silence to shape the narrative. They needed me to stay gone so they could keep pretending I'd turned out fine because of them. If I spoke too soon, I'd sound hysterical. If I waited, I could control the stage. That night, I lit a candle on the windowsill. Not for faith, just for light. I took out the paperwork I'd been avoiding for months, business registration forms. I had always used an alias, a shield to keep my past separate from my success. But the thought of them claiming my life as theirs twisted my stomach. For the first time, I filled in my real name, Indigo Rowe. When I signed it, the pen shook. Not from fear, but from the recognition that this signature was the first true one I'd ever written. I was claiming myself back. After filing the papers online, I stood by the window and watched the rain smear the city lights into ribbons. Down below, a man in a red jacket hurried through puddles, clutching a grocery bag to his chest. He looked small against the empty street. I knew that feeling. I poured another cup of coffee and leaned against the counter. My phone buzzed, a text from a college acquaintance I barely remembered. "Your mom's article was so inspiring. You must be proud." I didn't reply. I turned the phone face down. Midnight came and went. My computer screen dimmed. I reopened the article, reading every line until I could predict the next word before it appeared. The performance of it all felt suffocating, the quotes, the smiles, the neat way my pain had been folded into a redemption arc for her reputation. I thought about calling her, demanding a retraction. But I could already hear the tone she'd use. "Oh, Indigo, you're taking this too seriously. It was just an article. People love success stories." And if I pressed harder, she'd sigh and say, "You're still holding on to the past. Haven't you grown?" No. I had grown, just not the way she wanted. I closed the browser and opened a new document. The title, Statement of Ownership. It wasn't for publication. It was for me. I listed every project I'd done, every night I'd worked until dawn, every failure I turned into rent. Proof that my life had been built by my own hands. When the clock hit 2 a.m., I finally allowed myself to stop. My eyes ached. My neck burned. But for the first time since reading that article, I felt steady. I whispered to the dark, "This time, they'll need more than silence to hold me back." The night I promised myself they would need more than silence to hold me back, the rain didn't stop. It slid down the glass like tiny highways of light, the city outside glowing and wet. I'd just finished editing a presentation for a tech startup in Seattle, my first contract worth 5 figures. I hit send on the invoice and leaned back in my chair. The clock read 11:47 p.m. The hum of my computer filled the apartment. For a moment, I allowed myself a small smile. That kind of money used to sound impossible. Now it just meant I could pay rent without rationing groceries. Still, it felt like something solid, a quiet victory no one could steal. I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly, and let the rain drown the noise in my head. My phone buzzed on the table. I almost ignored it. At that hour, it was usually a client with a last-minute revision or a spam text promising a miracle loan. But then I saw the subject line flash across the screen. "From Mom, hopeful news." Every nerve in my body went rigid. My finger hovered above the screen before tapping. I didn't even breathe as the email opened. The message began with hearts and cheerful punctuation, her tone syrupy sweet, like she dusted it with powdered sugar to hide the taste. "Sweetheart, I hope you're doing well. I have such wonderful news. Darian has changed. Truly. He's been sober for over a year now and even helps out at the church youth group. The pastor says he's a natural leader. We've decided to let him move back home. He needs a stable environment, and I believe God is giving us a second chance as a family. Maybe this could be the start of healing for all of us. We'd love for you to visit soon. Love, Mom." 2 hearts. Attached was a photo, Valora, Luther, and Darian standing in front of the house I ran from 11 years ago. The paint looked new. The curtains behind them glowed warm, yellow, like forgiveness had been redecorated. I stared at that photo until my eyes burned. It wasn't just a picture. It was a rewrite. My hand shook so badly I dropped the phone. It clattered onto the desk, face up, their smiles frozen under the harsh LED light. My throat tightened. I pushed my chair back and stumbled toward the sink, gripping the edge until my knuckles went white. Bile rose. I gagged, dry and soundless. The taste of metal filled my mouth. The room spun. It felt exactly like that day in the church basement, the white dress, the camera flash, the applause for a piece that never existed. I turned on the faucet, splashed cold water on my face, and whispered to no one, "They gave him back my room." I slid down to the floor, knees pulled to my chest. My reflection trembled in the silver drain cap. The rain outside grew heavier. This wasn't about family. It never was. If they had truly wanted healing, they would have started with an apology, not a photo shoot. Letting him move back in wasn't forgiveness, it was erasure. It meant that I had been a misunderstanding, a bad phase they could now correct. By welcoming him home, they could pretend I'd left for no reason. My silence would become their permission slip to forget. I thought about replying, typing something like, "You can have him. You already chose him once." But I didn't. I wasn't giving her another sentence to twist. I returned to my desk. The email still glowed like a wound on the screen. Instead of deleting it, I opened a new tab and searched legal name change Oregon adult process. Scrolling through the results, I imagined the paperwork, signatures, notarization, a small fee. Freedom, printed in black ink. If they wanted a daughter who stayed quiet, they could keep the version they invented. I was done sharing her skin. Hours passed. I worked on autopilot, cleaning files from my computer, drafting invoices, updating contracts. Each small act became a ritual, tiny declarations of control. The rain softened to mist by dawn. When the first light crept through the blinds, I sat at the kitchen counter with a cup of black coffee gone cold. I pulled up the photo one last time. Valora had aged gracefully. Luther still had that mechanic's posture, shoulders hunched from years of lifting engines. And Darian, he looked polished, older, the kind of man strangers would call respectable. The scar under his chin was gone, probably faded, like everything else I remembered about him. Behind his left shoulder, my old bedroom window was visible. The same curtains. The same faint reflection of the oak tree that used to scratch the glass on windy nights. I could almost see the ghost of a girl sitting on that bed, sketchbook open, trying to draw a future that didn't include any of them. I closed the photo. I didn't cry. Not because I didn't want to, but because the tears would have felt like an encore, and I was done performing pain for their benefit. At noon, I forced myself out of the apartment. Portland's sky hung low, colorless. I walked 3 blocks to the corner cafe, ordered an espresso, and sat by the window. My phone stayed in my pocket. I didn't check for new messages. I watched the people on the street, an older couple sharing a muffin, a teenager rushing to catch the bus, a man in a suit talking too loudly into his AirPods. Ordinary lives, untouched by mine. For a fleeting second, I wondered what it would feel like to have a mother who simply asked, "Are you happy?" instead of "Are you still angry?" But I knew better. Some questions would never come, and some wounds didn't scar, they calcified. By evening, I was back at my desk. The email still sat in my inbox, unread since that first moment. I hovered the cursor over archive, but stopped. Deleting it would make it too easy for her to vanish again. Keeping it meant I could remember exactly what betrayal looked like in writing. Outside, the wind picked up. Somewhere down the block, a siren wailed and faded. I looked around my apartment, my small, imperfect sanctuary, and realized it was the only place in the world that still felt honest. I opened my notebook and wrote 3 lines. They called it forgiveness. I call it forgetting. And I won't let them forget me again. As night deepened, I shut the blinds, leaving the rain outside where it belonged. Then I stared at the photo one last time before closing the laptop. The cursor blinked over the words, "From Mom, hopeful news." I whispered, "I left that house like it was burning. Now they've rebuilt the fire inside it." The night after Valora's email, I couldn't sleep. My apartment felt colder than usual, even though the heater clicked on and off like always. The radiator hummed quietly beside the window, but there was no warmth in it. My mind kept circling that photo, Darian standing beside my mother, her hand resting on his shoulder like it belonged there. I'd left that house like it was burning. Now they were calling it a sanctuary again, rebuilding the narrative with the same bricks they once used to shut me up. By the next evening, I was buried in work. Back-to-back calls, edits, and rescheduling a branding campaign for a sustainable fashion label out of Boulder. I was halfway through uploading revised graphics when my phone lit up with a message from a name I hadn't seen in a long time. Joran. We weren't close, not anymore. We'd grown up next door to each other, spent summers climbing trees and sharing snacks through the fence, before everything fell apart. He moved away after high school, but we followed each other on social media and liked each other's posts out of habit. His message was short. Hey, thought you should see this. A photo followed. I tapped it without thinking. My heart slammed into my ribs like a drawer being shut too hard. The picture was of my old bedroom. Same walls, but painted a pale gray now. New white curtains. A motivational poster above the desk, something generic, like, choose joy. And on the bed, Darian's duffel bag. I stared at it for a long time. Not because I couldn't believe it, because I could. I'd known this was coming. The second Valora said he'd moved back, I should have known which room they'd give him. Still, seeing it was different. It felt like walking into your own funeral and watching someone else wear your name. Under the photo, Joran's next message blinked in. They gave him your room. Said it was symbolic. Symbolic. That word tasted like vinegar in my mouth. I set my phone down carefully, like it might explode. My chest felt too tight to expand fully. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the hardwood floor, trying to remember how to breathe. Memories came fast, like someone yanking open locked drawers in my mind. That room had been mine since I was 7. It had seen every version of me, the girl who drew horses on construction paper, the teenager who taped rejection letters to the wall just to prove they didn't kill her. It was the place I'd crawled into with trembling hands the night Darian crossed a line that shouldn't have been blurred. I remembered the drawer by the bed I'd once locked with a broken bracelet, whispering to it like a secret keeper. I remembered my knees scraped raw from trying to hide under the bed, stay small, stay silent. I reached for my own photo archive, old USBs, cloud drives, saved folders from long before I learned to hide my identity. After 15 minutes of searching, I found it. A photo of me at 14, sitting on that same bed. Eyes hollow. Hands limp in my lap. I didn't remember who took it. Maybe my mother. Maybe me, trying to look composed for something. But the expression said it all. I stared at it, then sent it back to Joran without a caption. His response came quick. I remember that night. No elaboration. He didn't need to explain. I opened a new message to Valora. No greeting, no text. Just the photo. Then I hit send. I turned off notifications, deleted her contact, and blocked the number. One by one, I erased every family member from my phone, from my life. I logged out of the group email thread they used for family updates. I removed my address from their emergency contacts. It didn't feel good. It didn't feel powerful. It felt necessary. Later that week, I visited the downtown courthouse. Filed the paperwork to legally change my last name. Dropped the middle name they gave me. Filed for a new trademark for my company, this time under my new legal name. Mine alone. There would be no confusion going forward. No easy way to drag me back into the photo albums of a life that never protected me. If they needed a daughter to decorate the story, I wrote in my journal that night, they'd have to find someone else. I closed the journal. Slept 6 uninterrupted hours for the first time since I was 14. No nightmares. No jolting awake to phantom footsteps outside my door. Just silence. It was enough. Almost. I woke to light bleeding through the blinds. I stretched, poured myself a glass of water, and opened my phone. One new message. From an unfamiliar account. Darian. No hard feelings. Let's grab coffee sometime. My hand froze mid-swipe. I didn't scream. Didn't cry. But my eyes widened, the kind of reaction your body gives when something inside you snaps back into place, not from healing, but from realization. He hadn't changed. He had evolved. He'd learned to speak softer. To type like a grown-up. To twist the narrative into something polite, palatable. But underneath the smiley face emoji he sent later that evening, it was still the same person. The one who sat on my bed and mocked my sketchbook. The one who wore my room like a costume. I didn't reply. I didn't delete the message either. I kept it there, unread, like a digital scar. A reminder. This time, I wasn't going to scream. I had louder tools than that now. When I saw that message from Darian, no hard feelings. Let's grab coffee sometime. I didn't respond. I stared at it until the words blurred, then turned my phone face down and let the silence do the talking. I wasn't falling for his brand of civility. He said it like we were ex-coworkers who'd had a minor disagreement, not like someone who'd hollowed out my childhood and handed it back wrapped in apology paper. The next morning, I channeled the fury into work. There's a kind of focus that comes from rage, sharp and efficient. I poured it into finishing a project for a renewable energy startup that wanted a rebrand. They loved slogans about sustainability. I gave them one about endurance. When I hit send on the final file, I felt clean, almost weightless. He said no hard feelings, I muttered, shutting the laptop. As if the knife had been rubber. That afternoon, while checking invoices, a new email pinged into my inbox. The subject line read, Forbes feature opportunity. I almost laughed, scam, definitely. But curiosity made me open it. Hi Indigo. I'm a journalist working on a piece about women redefining their identities through business and creative work. You were nominated anonymously. Would you be open to an interview? We admire your company's tone, quiet strength, no drama. I read the message twice. Anonymous nomination. Quiet strength. It sounded genuine, not like a PR trick. I hesitated, then typed back, yes, I'm interested. But no personal questions, especially about family. The reporter, a woman named Emma Walsh, replied within the hour, understood. This will focus entirely on you and your work. 2 weeks later, she arrived at my small Portland office. She was polite, professional, and didn't ask why the walls were bare except for a framed sketch of a tree with deep roots. We talked about branding, self-reliance, and the discipline of rebuilding yourself without a safety net. She smiled when I said, success didn't erase the past, it just gave it context. A month later, the article went live, the architect of her own name. My face on the cover, sharp blazer, plain background, no makeup touch UPS. Just me. The first paragraph read, Indigo Rowe built a company not from privilege, but persistence. She doesn't call it revenge. She calls it reclamation. I didn't post about it. People found it anyway. The numbers climbed, shares multiplied, comments flooded in. Most were kind. Powerful story. Inspiring woman. But not all of them. By day 2, I saw the reposts from my mother's church group. Screenshots, captions like a God redeems families and her parents raised her right. Then Valora's message arrived. You really think this erases what you did to us? I stared at the screen. What I did to them? I whispered. It was absurd enough to make me laugh. I didn't reply. She thrived on reaction, I wasn't feeding her anymore. 3 days later, another message arrived, this time from an acquaintance in the nonprofit circuit. Hey, congrats on the Forbes feature. Also, thank you for your generous donation to Hope Haven Shelter. It's making the rounds at the gala tonight. I frowned. I hadn't donated anything lately. Maybe an old payment cleared? I typed back a polite question, and a few minutes later she sent a link to the shelter's social media post. There it was, a photo of Valora and Luther at a fundraising dinner, shaking hands with the director, the caption glowing beneath it. Thank you to the family of Indigo Rowe for your $50,000 contribution supporting women's empowerment. My chest went still. Twist S12. I zoomed in on the photo. Behind them, the banner from the Forbes article hung as part of the decor, my face, my quote. I scrolled down the comments, what a beautiful family gesture. Full circle moment. It was almost poetic, my parents using the money I donated months ago under my company's name to buy a new mask of generosity. I didn't shout. I didn't call anyone. I just sat at my desk for a long time, listening to the hum of my computer, the faint sirens from downtown, the steady beat of my pulse counting down the distance between fury and control. By midnight, I'd drafted a response, not for them, but for myself. I opened my company website and edited the About section. Before. We help brands tell stories that inspire. After. Everything built here was done without inheritance, permission, or apology. Then I wrote a brief legal email to Hope Haven Shelter, attaching transaction records, clarifying the source of funds, and requesting that all public attributions be corrected immediately. I didn't demand an apology. I didn't threaten legal action. I just asked for accuracy. The next morning, they replied with genuine embarrassment, promised to issue a correction, and privately thanked me for my discretion. That was enough. I made myself breakfast, toast, black coffee, and watched the light crawl across the kitchen counter. The Forbes article kept climbing online, hitting national coverage. Clients started referencing it in meetings, calling me an example of resilience. Resilience. I hated that word. It always meant, you survived something we don't want to talk about. Still, the exposure brought new work, bigger contracts, more independence. With each call, each signature, the static in my chest eased. Then, one night near the end of the week, another email arrived. No subject preview this time, just from Mom. I clicked. We saw the article. Everyone at church did. We're proud of you, even if you've drifted from family values. Also, we'll be coming to your keynote next month. Can't wait to see you shine. I reread it twice, jaw tight. They weren't asking permission. They were informing me. Like guests RSVPing to a show they didn't help create. I closed my laptop slowly, the cursor blinking over her message like an uninvited knock at the door. We're coming to your keynote. It wasn't a threat. It was worse, it was a claim. It was fiction. Keep it if you want. That's what I told the woman outside the auditorium, her fingers still tracing the glittered edge of the Mother's Day card. She looked at me like I'd spoken a different language. I didn't clarify. I didn't explain. I just turned and walked toward the parking garage. The air outside was heavy with humidity, the kind that stuck to your skin and made you feel like you were dragging more than just sweat with you. I hadn't even taken off my heels yet. They clicked across the pavement, echoing with every step. It wasn't a sound of power. It was a reminder of what I had to wear just to be taken seriously. The keynote had ended an hour earlier. I'd stood on that stage, under lights hot enough to boil my spine, and delivered the speech I'd rewritten in the green room minutes before going on. Not because I forgot what I'd written, but because they showed up. Valora and Luther, sitting dead center in the third row. She wore a bright pink blouse, pearls, and a damn pin that read, Mom of the keynote speaker. I almost laughed. Almost. Luther sat next to her, arms crossed like he was watching a kid's school play. Comfortable. Settled. Like none of it was about him. When I spotted them, my breath caught in my throat. I blinked, forced my spine straight, and kept walking toward the stage. No stumbles. No cracks. They didn't get to have that. Twist S8, activated, all right. The event assistant had smiled and whispered, "You ready?" like I wasn't walking into a fire. I nodded. And when my name was announced, I stepped into the spotlight as if I hadn't just been blindsided by the ghosts of every trauma I'd buried. My speech was supposed to end with a story about resilience, something about business ethics and building a brand that reflects your inner compass. That's what they expected. Instead, I looked out over the audience, straight at the people who gave birth to me but never truly raised me, and said, some of us weren't born into stories worth keeping. So we built our own chapters. Silence, so thick you could taste it. Then applause, rising like a wave. Standing ovation. People clapped not because they knew my story, but because something in them recognized the ache behind the words. Valora clapped too. Of course she did. Afterward, I tried to leave through the side exit. I didn't want a meet and greet. I didn't need the photos. I just wanted air. But an event assistant caught me before I could get far. Someone left this for you, she said, holding out a pastel envelope. I took it with a nod, waited until I was outside to open it. The card was covered in flowers, sparkles, and cursive lettering that screamed performative love. Inside, the message read, "We're proud of you. Even if you're still holding on to old pain. Let's be family again. Love, Mom and Dad." No mention of Darian. No apology. Just the usual bait and switch. Look how proud we are of what you became. Please forget how we treated you before you got here. Twist S14. Neatly wrapped in florals and fake forgiveness. I didn't rip the card. I didn't pocket it. I walked back into the venue, placed it under the spotlight banner with my name printed across it, and left it there like evidence. Outside, I sat on the sidewalk in those heels, toes numb, and watched strangers pass by holding programs and tote bags. Some of them had taken notes during my talk. I wondered what they'd written. I wondered if anyone noticed that I had rewritten my ending in real time to keep from cracking open. My phone buzzed again, pulling me back. A text from someone I didn't recognize. That line hit hard. Thank you. Another. I've been trying to write my own chapter too. You gave me permission. I turned the screen face down on the pavement. The applause inside was already fading into memory. But the look on Valora's face, that smug tilt of her chin, stayed with me. She believed she had won something tonight. That by showing up, she'd claimed a piece of my success. You could see it in the way she waved at the photographer near the aisle, gently nudging Luther to smile as they both stood. She didn't just want to be seen, she wanted to be associated. That's always been her trick. Guilt and glamour. Twist the knife, then offer a napkin to clean up the mess. Earlier that week, her church group had posted about attending an empowering keynote by one of our own. No mention of what they never did for me. Just a clean photo, a caption about growth and faith, and comments from people who knew only the polished version of our story. I sat there outside, watching the sky fade from orange to navy. The event banners fluttered in the evening breeze. My name printed in bold. My face looking back at me. But none of it felt real. You'd think success would taste sweet. But when you've built it out of survival, it's more like sawdust. Eventually, a woman walked past, picked up the glittered envelope from under the banner, turned it over in her hands like she wasn't sure if it was trash or treasure. She looked at me and asked, "This yours?" I didn't hesitate. "It's fiction," I said. "Keep it if you want." She blinked. "It's pretty." "Looks can be," I replied. She nodded and walked away, card still in hand. I stayed seated a little longer, let the ache in my feet remind me that nothing about this night had been easy. Then I stood, smoothed down my blazer, and headed back toward the street. I didn't call a car. I walked the 6 blocks back to my apartment. Each step felt earned. By the time I got home, my inbox was full of new requests, clients, press, people wanting to collaborate. I responded to none of them. Instead, I opened my notebook, flipped to a blank page, and wrote. If they ever ask how I survived, tell them I walked out of my own story and started a better one. The woman's footsteps faded down the sidewalk, and I stayed still for a long moment, the night pressing against me like a hand over my chest. Fiction, I'd said. And that's exactly what it was, a story they wrote for themselves, dressed in glitter and denial. When I finally stood, the city was quiet, lights from passing cars stretching across the wet pavement like ribbons of color. I didn't realize how exhausted I was until I reached my apartment. My heels dangled from one hand, my phone in the other. I tossed everything on the counter, kicked off the shoes, and fell onto the couch without even turning on the lights. My body felt heavy, but my mind wouldn't rest. I closed my eyes, only to see Valora's face again, her polished smile under those stage lights. For her, love had always been theater. Morning crept in through the blinds before I'd even drifted off. My phone buzzed nonstop. At first, I thought it was another flood of congratulations about the keynote, but then I saw the messages, dozens of missed calls, hundreds of unread notifications. My name was trending again, but not because of my speech. The headline stopped me cold. I saw everything. I said nothing. She survived anyway. I clicked. The article was written anonymously, published by an online news outlet that specialized in human stories. The writer claimed to be a childhood friend who had witnessed what my family buried. She was 14. I saw it. I heard the whispers. I froze. She didn't. I watched her walk into silence and never come back out. It took me less than a minute to recognize the voice between the lines. Joran. Twist S15. The boy who once passed notes through the fence. The one who had seen more than he ever dared to admit. My breath hitched. I kept reading. For years, I convinced myself that staying quiet was protecting her. That if I didn't speak, she could move on. But silence isn't neutral. It sides with power. And I let power win. The article spread like wildfire. Thousands of shares, thousands of comments. This happens in every family. Her silence was never consent. Where's the apology? For a while, I just sat there, watching strangers piece together fragments of a story I'd tried to bury myself. The internet had done what I couldn't, it named the crime. I didn't post anything. Didn't answer calls. I downloaded the article, saved it on my desktop. Proof, finally, that someone else saw me. By noon, every major news outlet had picked it up. They blurred names, out of privacy concerns, but everyone local knew. The photo of my keynote spread alongside Joran's piece, captions calling it, "A story of survival finally coming to light." The conference organizers called that afternoon. They wanted to rebroadcast my keynote nationally, this time with a live introduction. I hesitated only a second before saying yes. But I had one condition, I wanted to add something, just a minute. They agreed. 2 days later, I stood backstage again, the same navy blazer, the same stage, but this time there were no parents in the audience, no fake smiles, no pink blouses. Just camera crews, technicians, and the faint hum of the world watching through screens. The lights came up. I stepped out. I repeated the opening of my keynote word for word until I reached the end, then paused. My hands steadied on the podium. "This is the part one didn't write down," I said. "They tried to bury what happened. But I built a company out of that dirt." The room held its breath. I could feel the weight of it pressing into me. "This stage isn't for the people who hurt me," I continued. "It's for everyone who's still not believed. The ones told to keep quiet for peace, for family, for faith. You don't owe your silence to anyone." The silence that followed wasn't empty, it was electric. Then applause erupted, first hesitant, then thunderous. Online, the broadcast chat flooded with messages. "She said what we all needed to hear. This is bigger than her story. Believe survivors." The hashtag "the truth they couldn't bury" began trending within the hour. Twist S16, fulfilled. When I left the stage, Emma, the journalist from Forbes, hugged me tight. "You did it," she said. I smiled, though I didn't know what it was anymore. Back at my apartment, I made tea and scrolled through the coverage. Every outlet had clipped the same 2 sentences. Darian's name wasn't printed anywhere, but people didn't need it. They saw enough. That night, another headline surfaced, "Private emails leak from mother of keynote speaker." Screenshots plastered across Twitter. Valora's words in black and white. "She's emotionally unstable. You know how she exaggerates. The internet loves a victim." Within hours, her Facebook filled with defensive comments from church friends, "We all make mistakes. She's still your daughter." By midnight, Luther's account disappeared completely. Valora's page went private. I didn't celebrate. I didn't post. I just stared at the screen until the text blurred. Vindication doesn't feel like victory. It feels like standing in the ashes of a house that finally stopped burning. The next evening, as I watered the plant on my windowsill, my phone buzzed again. One new message. Not a text, not an email. A voice note. It was her. I pressed play. "I didn't know it was this bad," Valora's voice trembled. "I never wanted you to feel erased. Please don't publish anything else. We're trying to move on." I listened once. Then again. Her tone wasn't guilt, it was damage control. I deleted it. For a long time, I just stood there, the phone still warm in my hand, Portland lights flickering outside like blinking stars. Somewhere, people were probably debating my life as if it were an episode on TV. But here, in this small apartment, it was just me. The girl who left quietly, and the woman who finally spoke. I closed my eyes and whispered, "They can't bury me now." I deleted her voice note, then set the phone face down on the table and stepped out onto the balcony. The evening light was fading, streaks of pink and gold sliding across the Portland skyline. The air smelled like wet concrete and jasmine from a neighbor's plant. Somewhere below, a bus groaned past, people heading home to their families. For a long time, I stood there without moving, the chill seeping into my bare arms. Then I went inside, pulled a blanket over my shoulders, and opened the old box I kept on the top shelf of the closet. It was where I put the things I couldn't throw away but couldn't look at either. Inside were old receipts, my first business license, the broken bracelet I once used to lock my nightstand drawer. At the bottom, folded between 2 sketch pads, I found a yellowed envelope. It was addressed in looping cursive, for Indigo. My grandmother's handwriting. Mavis. I hadn't seen it in years, maybe since before she passed. The paper felt thin as skin, the ink faded but still legible. I sat on the couch and opened it carefully. "I heard you cry that night," it began. I said nothing. "I'm sorry I didn't fight for you." My throat tightened. "But you are not crazy. You are not wrong. You are not alone." I read it twice, tracing each word with my finger. She must have written it after everything, maybe before I left for college. Maybe she'd slipped it into one of the sketchbooks I left behind. It had found its way back to me when I least expected it. For the first time in years, I cried, not out of anger, but release. Someone had known. Someone had believed me. Even if she hadn't been brave enough to speak then, she'd tried in the only way she knew how. I tucked the letter back into its envelope and placed it on my desk. Then I opened my laptop, more out of habit than intention. The first thing that greeted me was a social media post from a cousin I hadn't spoken to in over a decade. A family reunion photo, bright smiles all around. There was Valora, her hair perfectly styled, holding a casserole dish. Luther stood beside her, looking smaller somehow. Darian grinned in the center, one arm around a new woman I didn't recognize. I scrolled through every photo, barbecue, church, even a slideshow captioned, "Family through the years." My name wasn't mentioned once. Not in a single caption. I wasn't just missing from the frame, it was as if I'd never existed. Twist S11, my erasure, polished and complete. A notification popped up, another message request. "You made your mom cry," it read. "Why are you trying to destroy her?" A cousin, again. Then another. "You should remember where you came from. Not everyone gets second chances." Twist S10, when the guilty cry victim, the world claps for their performance. I didn't reply. I didn't defend myself. I just closed the messages and set the laptop aside. Instead, I brewed a pot of black tea and carried it back to the balcony. The city lights were coming on one by one, blinking into life. I wrapped my hands around the mug, the steam rising against the cool air. Stillness. That was the word for what I felt, not peace, not forgiveness. Just stillness. I unlocked my phone, opened the camera, and took a single photo, my face against the skyline, city lights blurring behind me. No makeup, no filters. Just me. I posted it with one caption, "Survival looks like this." Then I put the phone down and didn't check for likes. A few days later, an email arrived from a university in California inviting me to speak at their annual forum on women, identity and power. I almost declined. But something in me hesitated. They didn't want the trauma story, they wanted the growth, the perspective. I wrote back, "I'll do it. But I won't speak about my family. They had the mic for years. This time, it's mine." When I arrived on campus 2 weeks later, the auditorium was smaller, quieter. No flashing lights or cameras, just rows of students, mostly young women, waiting with notebooks open. The moderator introduced me simply, a woman who rebuilt her life on her own terms. I took the podium, smiled once, and began. I didn't tell them about the house, the betrayal, the photo that started it all. I told them about the strength it takes to keep living when the people who should have protected you pretend nothing happened. About how silence can be weaponized, and reclaimed. Afterward, students lined up to shake my hand, eyes bright, tears clinging to their lashes. Some said, "Thank you." One girl whispered, "I thought it was just me." That night, back in my hotel room, I opened my journal, the same one I'd been filling for years, and wrote my final entry. They took my silence for surrender. But I was just saving my voice for something bigger. The next morning, I returned to Portland. The rain had come again, soft and steady. I opened the balcony door, set down a cup of tea, and reread Mavis's letter once more. The words no longer hurt, they hummed like something sacred. Later that evening, as I was sorting through emails, a new message appeared in my social inbox. The sender's name was unfamiliar. The profile picture looked young, maybe a teenager. "I watched your speech," the message said. "I think I'm ready to tell someone." My fingers hovered above the keyboard. I typed slowly. "You don't have to be loud. Just brave." Then I closed the laptop, let the sound of the rain fill the room, and leaned back into the quiet. Because this was what survived, the part of me that refused to vanish, that kept breathing even when no one believed I was alive. Not everyone gets justice. But we all deserve to be heard. Not every story ends with an apology. Sometimes, it ends with clarity. Indigo's journey wasn't just about cutting ties, it was about reclaiming her voice in a world that kept trying to silence it. So here's the question, when forgiveness is demanded without accountability, is it really forgiveness, or just another form of control? If this story resonated with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away to protect your peace? Don't forget to subscribe